Okay, what you see so far is a block in, and I'm doing just a little bit of modeling now at this point, but we'll talk first of all about the importance of a block in. There's actually two ways of seeing. One, to begin with, when you're starting a portrait, what you want is to look at the entire shape, and one of the reasons we close our eyes is to get a simplified shape. So we're looking at one piece of information at a time and maybe a couple of lines just for the angle of the top of the head, a general angle of the top of the head. And generally speaking, that takes about 6 lines to get in the shape of the head before we're actually modeling. Now, what happens literally is that you actually try to close down your eyes just a little bit to simplify the form so that you see the entire form and can get, with just a few lines, the shape and size of your composition before you start into the interior and begin modeling from the inside out. So basically what you got, you put down the shape. Once you have the shape and size of the head, you'll find, for instance, the center between the top of the head and the bottom of the chin. Put a line there for the position of the eyes, and that line helps you not only to line up maybe the tear ducts or the outside corners if they're in line with each other. Sometimes you'll have eyes that will actually angle upwards or downwards, but what you want to do is try to get them across from each other. Now, naturally, a real person might actually have a little deviation in the features of the face, but basically, there's two ways of seeing. Once you have put down a map of how you're going to put this portrait shape onto the drawing, then you can begin modeling the forms. And generally, you'll see me doing this slightly to begin with, not putting it down hard and fast. But once I get the shape and maybe even a little bit of the modeling and what it's going to look like in its finality in a kind of mapped out way, both the drawing itself and then a little bit of how the modeling is going to work on the face. Then you'll see me going into detail on the features. I will start putting those in detail to make them look as realistic as I know how. And basically, when you do that, when you get into the modeling, you're going to try and get the dimensionality of the portrait as complete as you possibly can, or as contrasting as you possibly can. So you're trying to create a form, three-dimensional form on a two-dimensional surface, and that takes a knowledge basically of how to model form. You have to know, for instance, just modeling a basic ball is absolutely important. There's a highlight, a halftone, a core shadow, a reflected light, and a cast shadow. That's 5 different values that go across a rounded form. That's like the forehead, the eyeballs, the nose. All of the forms you see on there have to be modeled so that they look three-dimensional on a two-dimensional piece of paper. And so basically, you have these observations that you're making. You're having to close down your eyes to get the simple shapes and then open them up. To begin with, it's important to simplify the form, to get it on there, to get it proportionally correct, and that's called a block in. Then when you get into the interior of the drawing, you're trying to model a form and make it as dimensional as possible, and then you'll notice that after the shape of the head is basically formed, then you can start on the interior and work out from the interior of the face out to the outside edges and kind of restate those as you're finishing. So you're basically going from the outside in and from the inside out. And so in doing so, you're trying to get everything in proportion. And once you begin, so it is vital that you have a good block in. And so that needs to be practiced. And and basically, we're going to create a video where we can show you generic features of the face and what to look for and how to model those to make them as dimensional as possible and to make them rhythmic and so forth. You have to look for the rhythms that you're seeing in any life forms. There are really no straight lines in the figure, in the portrait. We start out with straight lines, and then we round the forms a little bit to get them in shape. But geometricizing those forms to begin with, and we'll demonstrate this on another video, helps you to grasp those forms. For instance, the nose is a kind of blob unless you kind of look at it as a geometricized face. It's almost a chevron sign shape for the end of the nose. And then you have the flare of the nostrils coming out from the side. You put a little mark to figure out what the width of the flare of the nostrils. Now, again, we're going to do a demonstration where we show you the generic sizes and shapes of the interior of the face. For instance, the eye shape. The eyes are one eye space apart. The nose is approximately the same size as the eye. And when you drop down and you do the mouth, generally the mouth, now you have to look at your model to know if there are variations from these generic shapes we're talking about. But you drop a line visually from the iris down to the end of the eyes, and generally speaking, the ends of the mouth will come at the end of the at the iris, a drop down line. Now, if the angle of the face changes, that will change. It will shorten the further side and actually maybe give you a little bit more width on the side that is toward you. So you have to look at those things individual, but observation is the key. And what's important is that when you are looking at a face and trying to draw it, you have to kind of divorce yourself from the idea or the identity of the person itself. You have to think individually of the pieces that you're putting together. What's the angle of the sides of the head? What's the angle of the top of the head? What's the angle of the jaw lines? And you can actually use an instrument or a pencil to hold it up and get those general angles. And if you get your drawing so that you don't have to turn your head too much, you can actually transfer that angle to the drawing itself and get it accurately. But if you're used to doing this, it's not so necessary. But you'll even see a practiced artist use an instrument to actually measure the size of the individual features. For instance, the forehead. Daniel Green, a famous portrait artist who passed away not too long ago, says that the hairline to the top of the eyebrows, from the top of the eyebrows to the bottom of the nose, those are 1/3. From the bottom of the nose down to the bottom of the chin is another third of the face. That's not including the hairline. That's how he measured it. When I'm looking at the model here, I will use tricks. Again, we're going to have to show you how to measure these things. But if I want to know where the end of the nose is, I will use an instrument to go from the outside corner of the eye down across the end of the nose to do what's called triangulation to see exactly where that line goes. when I get down to the shoulders, when I place a line, I have to look at something. I'll even use an instrument to actually get the angle of the shoulders and visually visualize that line across the face, so I know where that line goes. If I want to actually draw a very light line even across the face, because charcoal is such a movable instrument. It's malleable. You can you almost erase it with your fingers, and then you spray fix it when you're done. So you'll now see this thing coming into shape. And I'm just using a piece of vine charcoal to begin with. There are 3 types of charcoal, generally speaking, that you'll use. I'm using vine, which is maybe the softest. And then I will get into charcoal pencils. There's also something called compressed charcoal and thicker charcoal, where you can mass in forms, but I'm not using any of those in this case. I'm just using the vine charcoal and the charcoal pencils, which give me enough value information on the portrait itself. So once we get in those major forms, another idea, and you'll see this used in a lot of portrait demonstrations on the internet, where you see artists in paint just put in two major values. So you're looking generically, you see the eye sockets themselves are an indentation, so they're all going to be a little bit darker. So you've got a darker indentation in that shape. You can actually mass in a little bit of darkness there. Underneath the nose, you'll see, if you squint your eyes again, you'll see the shape of the shadow, and you can mask that in to begin with, just to see how the form relates and all that before you tie into all the real detail. And when I do that, I actually begin in detail, and everything then relates to those detailed features that will then dictate where I place everything else. So again, in this case, this face is bigger than life size. That's a little bit tougher to control. Also, you should know that if you're drawing small, that's more difficult than life size or larger. So you've got to be pretty well trained in just getting down the form. Now, when a lot of artists who are teachers have trained really good illustrators or really good capable drawing students, they really emphasize the 3-dimensionality of form. So knowing the highlight, halftone, core shadow, reflected light, cast shadow is vastly important. And you have to continually think of that. If you force yourself to do these things correctly, they become habit. The beginning student will try to start in detail, and that throws everything off. Either you get it too small or too large, but when you get into detail, you lose the effect of the proportion. And it's interesting, because when your eye looks at a piece of information, what is outside of what you're looking at specifically becomes a little bit, that information is very much reduced. So you're actually looking at one piece of information at a time, getting angles, getting the values and all that. What tends to happen with people who are drawing or painting is that they lose concentration. The reason is when they begin getting into detail or whatever, they will begin thinking of things that are not related to the drawing. And this is because when you relax and try to draw, you start thinking of all the stuff that you have to do or other things, and you lose concentration. And that's when you start doing the same strokes over and over again. And I find that that is something that students do regularly, and it's almost like you go to sleep in the process of trying to get this the whole thing correct. So all of this is what we would call academic training, and I find students who maybe even went through an entire college degree and never really got what they wanted in terms of just academic training, how to get the drawing correct and how to create the dimensions of form on a surface where they really weren't academically trained. Now, there are schools that actually train you in this in a very strict manner. They will have you draw for months or even a year before you get into black and white painting, and then you get into full color eventually. And they really teach you a methodology of how to measure everything. And it's important to remember that everything is measurable. This is the reason sometimes, I have never seen an artist hold up his thumb to measure something. I mean, surely it's possible. Normally, if you've got an instrument in your hands, you'll perhaps measure from the middle of the eyes up to the top of the head and compare that from the middle of the eyes down to the bottom of the chin to see if those proportions are correct. And you have to keep checking yourself over and over again. So we're seeing this thing come into shape very slowly. But basically, you're seeing these forms become more and more dimensional. The eyes, for instance, it is vastly important to get the modeling around the eyes. Again, you have to pay very strict attention. When you're looking at an eyeball, you will notice, for instance, there is shadow underneath the eyeball, underneath the lower lid. And that is vastly important to the shape of the eye. It's not a bag. I find that students are thinking incorrectly. They will not touch that shadow because, they feel like, well, I'm creating a bag underneath the eye. Well, the bag comes down in a triangular shape much lower than that. I know I've got them, but it's part of the form. So the form around the eyeball is very important to not only get the shape, but if you trying to make something glamorous, you emphasize the contrast there, because the eye is the most important part of the face, and the face is the most important part of the figure, because it's the light of the body. The eyeball is, the light of the body, but you get all the expression and attitude and emotion primarily in the face, and then of course it would extend out. If you're doing a figure, it would extend out to the position of the body. Gives you some sense of maybe the confidence of the person you're drawing, or the relaxed or tense attitude of the person that you're drawing, and all that. So now we're seeing this these forms come into shape, and I'm tightening up those things. Now, it's important also to realize that an artist has about 2 hours of visual sensitivity, or there's another word for it, but basically after about two hours, you lose a little bit of your ability to see shapes correctly. So what happens is you must, if you're doing something that requires a lot of measurement, as does a portrait, you will do best to actually take a break and come back to it. Now, you will find that maybe the next day you'll come in and see something that is perhaps just a little bit off. And in the process of drawing, I did the same thing. I actually changed some of the contours, the outside, especially the top of the head in this case. I actually reduced a little bit of the top of the head and shrank that down just a little bit as I as I drew and kind of finalized the forms. Because you're having to come back, look at it, reanalyze to see that you got everything in proportion and then everything in modeled correctly so that you're getting the full effect of what is possible. Again, what's important? In this case, I'm drawing from life, and most of the models that you will actually draw from life will float just a little bit. That means their position will change just a little bit. So you've got to look at the model, look at the position, and for instance, in this case, I was looking at the left ear on the drawing, his right ear, but the width of that gave me a clue as to what was the exact position of the turn of the head. But something that I had to look at a little bit later was the position of the ears. Generally speaking, when you're doing a generic straight-on portrait, the top of the ears come to maybe the top of the eyeball and will come down to the end of the nose, generically speaking. So we will draw that in a sample drawing. But when the tilt of the head changes, if the chin goes down, the ears go up. If the chin goes up a little bit, the top of the ears will go down a little bit. So you have to. There are two indicators of whether or not you've got the exact same pose. Now, if you're drawing from life, normally a person is not. You have to have kind of a straight face, and you have to be kind of sensitive to whether or not the person is getting tired, because you can get that look in the face. So, that's the advantage sometimes of taking a photograph. But if you've got a good model, you can call them back to position and get them. I think you can get a good look and expression on the face. It just depends on, I've had models go to sleep on me in the process of drawing. I was drawing my nephew one time. He fell asleep, so I had to finish or try to finish the drawing later, and we never got back to it. And then he died, and I really wished that I had somehow completed that drawing. Now today, it's so much easier than it used to be in the past, because we've got instant photography, instant image on your cell phone, and in many cases I draw right from my cell phone because the picture is clear enough that I can finish a drawing. Back in the old days, before photography and all that, when doing a royal portrait, they would actually dress up people in costumes of the king's costume and so forth, to sit in place of the royal person so that they could model all the clothing without having to take too much time of the important person that they were actually painting. So they used all kinds of tricks. Back in the 1900s, they would actually use dolls, mannequins, that they would dress in the costume of the person and complete all the folds and so forth, the clothing, with a mannequin there, so that they can get all that stuff in one position and could model the whole thing together so that it looked convincing. So we don't normally do that nowadays because we've got such capabilities in terms of photography and so forth. But what you're seeing here is not something that is taught, generally speaking. Working from life. The ability to do that is pretty important, I think. And if you can get a good model to cooperate, you're going to be set. Now, the easiest things to paint, in my opinion, is still life, because you can put it up there and it will sit still for you. You can design it and maybe even move it around, even in process of painting a little bit, to get the design exactly like you want it. And you can do the same thing with a person. If you get the right clothing and the right background and so forth, you can design the whole set. Of course, it's different with landscape because it's tougher to move a tree, to put it in the right place. But so you have to do that in the design itself. But portrait drawing, as you're seeing here, and painting is, in my opinion, the hardest thing to do. It's not time-consuming wise. It's not that difficult to get it done, because this kind of thing can be done in like 3 hours time, and you can do a detailed portrait, just depending on how much detail you have in the clothing or other things that you want to put into the background. But when you're doing a landscape, you just have to kind of move around things, or try to find the perfect landscape painting, or maybe even go around photographing things. But it's very interesting as a landscape painter, and I've done it all: portrait, landscape, still life, sculpture, watercolor, all that. And here's the place where you really develop your abilities. If you can model form and you can get it in the right proportion, and you know how to do that, and again, everything is measurable, that gives you capability to move from one medium to another without difficulty. If you learn to actually see correctly, this is it's vastly important. What's also important in the process of painting is just plain looking at the composition, because in the process you will realize, if you're looking at back and forth from your model or your subject back to your canvas or paper, you have to look and see if there are any differences between what you're drawing and what the subject looks like, and see why there are differences, and to see if you can actually make them better or make them look more like they really look. And if you learn, again, how to model those forms: highlight, halftone, core shadow, reflected light, cast shadow, if you can do that, you can learn to even emphasize it a little bit to your advantage.